Please be advised that this episode contains discussions of homicide, including graphic details. Listener discretion is advised. Bill Thomas is the older brother of Cathy Thomas, one of the first two victims in the still unsolved Colonial Parkway murders. In 1986, Cathy, alongside her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski, were tragically murdered in a case that remains a heartbreaking mystery. Their bodies were discovered on September 19, 1986, in a remote area of Colonial Parkway near Williamsburg, Virginia. This crime was part of a larger series of murders that took the lives of 8 young people in the region between 1986 and 1989. Despite numerous investigations and theories, the case remains unresolved and the killer has never been identified, making it one of Virginia's most haunting cold cases. Bill's personal connection to this tragedy has driven his commitment to seeking justice for his sister and the other victims. With over 30 years of experience in the entertainment industry, Bill has worked with notable artist advocacy organizations such as SAG-AFTRA, the American Federation of Musicians, and the Art Directors Guild. He is currently the host of Mind Over Murder podcast, where he delves into true crime, including the Colonial Parkway Murders, alongside his co-host Kristin Dilley. Through this platform, Bill shares his own journey and the ongoing pursuit of answers, hoping to bring attention to the case and keep the victims' stories alive. This is True Crime in Hollywood, Bill's personal tale. Listeners, the individual that I'm sitting down with this morning is Bill Thomas, and I have known about Bill for a few years, and we were just little Twitter friends way back when, and I didn't get to know him until a couple of months ago almost, where we were both asked to do an interview for the stream on Al Jazeera English. And Bill was one of the panel individuals that we started having this discussion about ethics in true crime. And not even 30 minutes later, I hear from Bill after we wrapped up that recording, and we could tell we spoke each other's language. And it was so special that the first time we got to sit down, talk, it turned into like 2.5 hours, and we barely scratched the surface. So this interview today is really important for me because Bill has been such an amazing advocate for his sister Cathy, along with her partner Rebecca, that were murdered in the 80s. And so 38 years ago, this has been something that has been at the forefront for Bill for that many decades. And when we're talking about ethics and true crime, these are the people that you need to be hearing from. So Bill, welcome to True Crime in Hollywood.
Well, it's great to be here. And let's see if we can do this in less than 2.5 hours.
I mean, my interview with Callahan Walsh turned into 3 hours, so all bets are off.
Really?
Yes,
Wow.
yes. So just like I said, we speak each other's language. I understand, who you are as a person, and I'm so excited to get this conversation going. So with that being said, Bill, can you tell me about your childhood? What was early life like? Some of those pivotal moments for you that you reflect on today.
Oh, thanks. Well, I come from an Irish Catholic family from outside of Boston. My parents, both of whom are gone now. My dad was a naval officer and my mom was a nurse. And my dad was from Lowell, Massachusetts, and my mom is from Lawrence, Massachusetts. These are old industrial mill towns on the Merrimack River. This is about 25 miles north of Boston. And my dad went to Annapolis, and I come from a Navy family. As a matter of fact, 4 kids in my family, again, Irish Catholic. And my father, my older brother Richard, and my youngest sister Cathy, whom you referenced, are the first father, son, daughter graduates of the United States Naval Academy.
Wow.
And then the 2 kids in the middle, that would be me. I'm in the second slot. So it's Richard, then Bill, and my brother Jack. We kind of went down the arts and music road, not the Navy road. Now, my dad was a career naval officer, but he never pushed us to, you know, join the military or anything like that. And I remember
Okay.
him saying to us as kids, we could easily do great things in the civilian sector. But I think we were all intrigued by my father's naval career. Now, as the four kids grew up, my mom stepped away from her nursing career for a while to raise the family. And remember, at that time, this is in the 60s, we moved every 2 years when we were kids. So it was kind
Yeah.
of this adventure
Yeah.
where every 2 years, typically in the spring, my dad would come home and he would say in this great dramatic voice, I got my orders today. And then that night, we knew that after dinner, mom and dad would tell us
Wow.
what dad's orders were going to be and where we were going to move. And
Wow.
this is before the internet. And
Yeah.
what we would do typically is we would go to the encyclopedia. Learning was very big in my parents' house,
Yeah.
and look up this place we were going to move. And then typically when we got to school, like the next day or whatever, we'd go to the library and we might look or ask the librarian, do you have any books on Hawaii, for example? You know, we
Yeah.
lived in Hawaii
Ah,
in the mid 60s,
wow.
and which was actually really far away. And
Yeah. A long flight.
and again, I make it sound like I'm 1,000 years old, but there were no satellites
Yeah.
showing the news. So, for example, this is at the height of the Vietnam War. Um,
Mm.
my mom would very anxiously watch the 11 o'clock news, which was the 6 o'clock feed from the West Coast, which they put on an airplane, you know, a regularly scheduled flight, and flew it to Honolulu. And then they would run the videotape of NBC News or whatever. I
Whoa.
remember my mom being upset on a number of occasions when they would say, we're very sorry. There won't be any national news tonight because the tape didn't make the plane. So,
Oh.
Hawaii, in this regard, was actually very isolated. Like when we moved there, we got our one crate of furniture in
Mhm.
30 days and the rest of your furniture in 90 days. If you had a dog, your dog went into quarantine. If you moved there, this was like a really, really big deal. So,
Yeah.
anyway, back to our lives as kids, we moved around all the time when we were kids. Every 2 years, there was a new place to live. So that
Wow.
made the four kids in my family very close. We were like our own gang, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And then typically you'd move in the summer and then you'd start school, of course, in September. And that's when you would meet more of the kids beyond your immediate
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood kids. And we were in places where there were a lot of military kids.
Mm.
So that was interesting because those kids knew what it was like to be the new kid in school over and over and over again. We,
Right.
we kind of saw it as like this great adventure. We really
Yeah.
liked it. Like people said to me, you know, was that tough? As you get a little bit older and you start developing, you know, stronger ties with your classmates, or you know, you start dating, you know, stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes a little harder to leave your friends behind every 2 years. But for the most part, we really liked it. And then
Yeah.
interestingly, two of the four kids in my family ended up joining the Navy and
Yeah.
having Navy careers.
Wow. That's interesting. I didn't know that about you. So, with that being said, though, because you started touching on it, you have been in this Hollywood industry too, from music all the way to AFTRA. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah. So I started a million years ago doing college radio
Yeah.
at the University of Massachusetts, um, but ended up being asked by friends to manage their college bands.
Mm.
And so I ended up being a road manager, live sound engineer,
Wow.
artist manager, you know, of Boston based rock bands. And in 1990, after my sister Cathy had died, I ended up moving to New York from Boston and going to work for ASCAP, the songwriters organization. And that ended up kind of establishing a different part of my career.
Mhm.
I worked for ASCAP as director of public affairs and then chief of staff. So I was with them for 14 years. After that, I left ASCAP and was recruited to move to Los Angeles from New York to take over the AFTRA Los Angeles office. And I was one of the senior execs that helped put together the merger of the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, or AFTRA, to create SAG-AFTRA. And
Mhm.
those two unions have been trying to merge for like 60 years. I'm not
Oh
joking.
my gosh, seriously?
We finally put it
Wow.
together that it was a deal that was acceptable to both SAG and AFTRA members. Most working performers were members of both unions, so we didn't
Yeah.
really need two of them. So I was with SAG-AFTRA for 6.5 years, then the American Federation of Musicians, the Art Directors Guild, and then ultimately um, I decided to move back from Los Angeles with my partner Pamela. We decided to move back to the East Coast, so we moved back 6 years ago now. And
Hmm.
now, I was at it long enough so that I don't have to work full time outside the house anymore, and I can
Yeah.
do things I want to do. Pamela, my wonderful partner, is an artist, so we are now in a position where we can do other stuff. And one of the things I wanted to do was kind of shift my professional focus to more attention to the Colonial Parkway murders, my sister Cathy and her girlfriend
Mhm.
Becky's case. And that's how I got into initially podcasting as a guest and writing and television production and stuff like that.
Yeah. And so segueing into that, because, you know, it feels like 1986 is still only like 20 years ago, and I realize no, it is not. Kathy and Becky's story is such an important reminder of how long trauma stays with trauma survivors and the impact of that in your life. And just as you shared, you you were used to moving around, all of these different kind of shifts in your life. What was that initial shift like for you? And at what point did you start going and speaking to the media, and how did that all kind of come to be?
Wow. Well, it's this kind of trauma, in this case, losing my sister Kathy and her girlfriend Becky Dowski in 1986. It marks like a before and after. It's one of those lines in your life. I usually use 9/11
Yeah.
as an example that a lot of people can understand. Um, where there's this line of demarcation where there's the before
Hmm.
and then there's everything that came after. So we got I got a phone call from my parents in October 1986. I was living in Philadelphia at the time, working for RCA Video, and the phone rang. And yeah, I always have to remind people when I speak to college age audiences and younger people. And these days, everybody's younger than I am. Um, this is before the internet, before cell phones. It was landlines only.
Mhm.
Um, so the phone rang. It was a Sunday. I was at my apartment. I was not at work, and it was my parents. Not unusual to talk to them at all. We were very close family, and but it was both my mom and dad. Again, not
Mhm.
that unusual, but it was what my father said at the top of the conversation. He said, "Are you sitting down?" And I
Mm.
remember thinking, weird thing to say. What do you mean, am I sitting down? And
Yeah.
he then proceeded to tell me what they knew, which is that my sister Cathy, who was living in Virginia Beach, Virginia, had been found murdered in her car with her relatively new girlfriend, whom we hadn't even met yet. Her name was Rebecca Dowski, and she was a student at William and Mary. Now, my sister had attended the Naval Academy in the second class with women in it, which
Mm.
actually could link to her murder. Even to this day, it's still unsolved. And she had been in the Navy and had left the Navy after 5 years, which is your minimum term of service. You know, if you go to the Naval Academy, get your college degree, that's 4 years. You owe them five.
Mm-hmm.
She had made a decision to leave the Navy after 5 years because she was a lesbian. And this is at a time even before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, when it was completely illegal to be gay or lesbian and be in the service. Again, this sounds like it's 1,000 years ago, and it's really less than 40.
Mm-hmm.
So Cathy and Becky had been found murdered in my sister Cathy's Honda Civic in a place called the Colonial Parkway, which I'd never heard of, but it was not far from Williamsburg, where William and Mary is located. So that's where Becky's going to school. And we'd heard a lot about Becky, and we were really excited to be meeting her that Thanksgiving. Remember, this is October now. So we were very excited to be meeting Becky. We'd heard all these wonderful things. And unfortunately, that never happened. But back to my mom and dad. So my dad did most of the talking, which is not unusual. My mom was kind of quiet. But he told us what they knew, which was not a lot. It occurred to me years later that my parents would have had to have made the exact same phone call to all three of the brothers: Richard, Bill, I was the second oldest, Jack, he's a year and a half, 2 years younger than I am. And then Cathy and Jack are almost Irish twins. They're like a year and 2 weeks apart.
Wow.
In terms of birth order. Interestingly, the two oldest kids, Richard and Bill, were both straight. And then the two youngest kids, Jack and Cathy, are both gay. I remember my sister-in-law, who's married to my older brother, saying at a family dinner years ago, what did I think the chances were of two of the four kids in a family being gay and lesbian? And I was like, how the hell would I know? And everybody burst out laughing. Because I don't know.
Yeah.
You and I have a lot of friends that are gay and lesbian.
Yeah,
I don't know
exactly.
how
I don't
it
know.
works.
Right.
I just know I have a lot of friends, and some of them are gay and some of them are straight, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't think about it very much.
Mm-hmm.
But back then,
Mm-hmm.
and in the United States Navy, this was a really, really big deal. So this idea that my parents had to start this long, painful journey, it started, that day. And for instance, they spoke with Richard, who was living in Hawaii. He was also in the Navy. He was a Navy doctor. And then me, and they actually didn't get a hold of my younger brother, Jack, until the next day, Monday, at work. But again, back then, if you wanted to get a hold of somebody, your choices were the phone.
Yeah.
Full stop. And mostly landlines. There were answering machines back then. I think about my Panasonic cassette based.
I remember those.
But people look at me like, what?
Yeah.
And I get a lot of questions when I talk about the Colonial Parkway murders, is what they became to be known as. But at this point, you called somebody at home or at work, and you left a message if you were lucky enough that they had some sort of device that answered the phone. So they didn't even get to my brother Jack, who was super close with Cathy and obviously devastated by this news, until the next Monday morning at work. He worked for the Schubert organization in New York. So it starts this long, just horrible process of grieving and questions and, searching for answers. And if you die in a national park, the National Park Service and the FBI are the responsible agencies for investigating, like in this case, a double homicide. The other so called Colonial Parkway murders haven't happened yet because it's four double homicides, approximately one per year, kind of spaced out. So Cathy and Becky are the first. No one calls it the Colonial Parkway murders. There was a lot of concern at the time. I don't think we used the expression hate crime back then, but there was a lot of thinking that the fact that Cathy and Becky were involved in a lesbian relationship could be very important. And also the fact that my sister had just gotten out of the Navy a few months before could be important. So they were looking at a lot of different things. But that painful process, started that day. And I've said before on our podcast, Mind Over Murder, and elsewhere, the single most painful experience of this entire thing was watching my own grief reflected in my parents' eyes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And goes without saying, Bill, I am so sorry again for your loss. And it's disheartening, to know still 38 years ago and no answers. So when we talk about that, we know that maintaining cases in the media is almost crucial to make sure that justice is served, if you will. And as you mentioned before, this eventually would turn into the Colonial Parkway murders. So with that being said, that then transitioned to now your family is relying on the FBI because it was a national park. So how did you start navigating that necessarily in the media? Because, again, like making sure that we're not forgetting about these cases. And just as you said, this is also a time where internet didn't exist, podcasts, all of this. This wasn't something that, like you really had to make the effort to ensure they were still being remembered and that this case was still cold. So what was that like?
Well, in retrospect, I think my family made a tremendous mistake, which
Mm,
is they refused to discuss Cathy's murder publicly.
mm,
And except for doing a single interview with our hometown newspaper, the Lowell Sun,
mhm,
with someone who had gone to school with my older brother Richard at Lowell High School, they did one interview with the hometown newspaper. Now, you can imagine that our phone at our beautiful house in Lowell was ringing off the hook. Um, remember if my parents turned it off, but I think they might have. But all the if the my parents had allowed it, there would have been a media frenzy. Because I
mhm.
remember one of the New York papers, the Daily News, I think, had these horrible pictures. They had were driver's license pictures of Cathy and Becky. So that's what they went with. And
Wow.
it was the front page, a full page of the tabloids in New York, and it said co-eds throats slashed. Now, Becky Dowski was a student at William and Mary. She was a senior transfer student studying business. She was a co-ed. My sister Cathy actually had graduated from the Naval Academy 5 years before, and she was
Mhm.
27 years old. Now she was going to grad school and working as a stockbroker at that point, but I don't think she was a co-ed by any stretch.
Right.
But that was, you know, there was a significant media splash, particularly in Virginia, where the cases took place. And if my parents had participated, there would have been, news trucks and newspaper, the Boston Globe and the Herald and, WBZ TV and all those stations that we normally watched and listened to. And newspapers were incredibly important back then.
Mm-hmm.
But except for that single interview, my parents never spoke about my sister's case again. Now, my dad was a college professor and a dean and very well known in Lowell. He had hundreds, probably ultimately thousands of students who had graduated but had come through his classes. And so a lot of people knew my parents. And of course, my family's from there. Um, so people knew about it, but my parents never spoke about it, only privately.
Yeah.
And interestingly, my dad was the talker, as I mentioned, but it was my mom actually. It was very quiet Irish cat, very Catholic. She actually kind of dictated, and I mean this in a good way, kind of what went on inside the house. Like, even though she was very quiet, you had to listen very carefully when she spoke. Sometimes she was excruciatingly funny, and even though she was a lovely person, with this incredible red hair, by the way, which we all had red hair, but most of us had red hair. But people don't believe me now because it's a lot lighter than it used to be. But
I believe it.
if you listened carefully to what my mom said, which you needed to do, there was a lot of wisdom and thoughtfulness and humor mixed in here. Now, she early on, she laid down some dictates. One was, of course, that we weren't going to speak publicly. I remember her saying, they write things about you in the newspaper that aren't true. Now, I might disagree with her about that, but I didn't necessarily debate it. She also laid down some other dictates, though, like if Cathy's name came up in conversation, which it normally would, this is a very close family, lots of in jokes and, teasing and all that kind of stuff. She said that if Cathy's name came up, that didn't necessarily mean that the conversation had to come to a halt or dissolve into tears every single time, because there were lots of funny and joyful moments in our lives.
Right.
And so when funny stories or things that Cathy used to say, of which there are many, she was a very colorful character. And one of the wonderful things that came out of the outreach from her Naval Academy classmates and friends from high school and Annapolis was that we heard just incredible stories, some of which we'd not heard before, about things that Cathy did. Now, remember, they were in the second class with women at the United States Naval Academy. This was not the Navy's finest hour, and I come from a Navy family. They treated those women like dirt. They were not set up for it. They were extremely unwelcoming. The harassment was off the charts. The weird thing is that upperclassmen at the Naval Academy and the other military academies, the academies are actually run by the students. So a first classman, as they're called, would be a senior. They're actually more or less in charge of the brigade of midshipmen.
Wow.
And this group of men had come in under a single sex arrangement. And then Congress decided in 1976 we were going to open up the service academies to women. So Cathy's in the second class with women. So those firsties, as they called them, they had come in under a single sex arrangement and then were forced to accept a group of young women coming in from all over the country. So those first classes of women were treated like absolute garbage.
Yeah.
Just absolutely horrible. But one of the things that came out in the wonderful stories we heard was that Cathy who was incredibly positive and optimistic and fun and feisty. She had red hair, bright blue eyes. She didn't take crap from anybody. about
Mhm.
anything. So she would stand up for herself and her classmates. And I remember hearing all these great stories about hysterically funny things they did and how they got back at some of these guys. And Cathy used to have this expression, suck it up, buttercup, because these women were so harassed and so
Yeah.
pushed so hard. They were actually trying. I'm not exaggerating. There were efforts made at the highest level at the Naval Academy and in the United States Navy to push these women out of the Navy. They wanted them to quit.
My goodness.
And people like Cathy refused to bend. And
Mhm.
so they stuck it out. And this expression she used to use, suck it up, buttercup, was a way of bucking up her female classmates. Now, she was close with her male classmates too, and a lot of them remember her very fondly, but
Yeah.
it's it was never surprising to us that she did so well, even though we had concerns. My older brother, who was 6 years older than Cathy, he had graduated from the Naval Academy in 75. My dad in 53, Richard in 75, Cathy in 81. We were all concerned because we knew it was going to be a rough ride. It ended up being so much worse than any of us expected. But the thing about Cathy is she was the person you meet every once in a while. She would work harder and push herself more than anyone you'd ever met.
Mm.
So it didn't matter what it was she put her mind to, if it was academics or athletics or you name it, she was going to work harder than anybody you ever met. And that's how she succeeded. I remember they were putting together a track team at Lowell High School where we went to school. There wasn't a women's track team at that point. Again, this sounds like a billion
Wow.
years ago. It's not that long ago.
Yeah.
They were not very focused on women's athletics. So Cathy was on the basketball team, and then they were putting together a track team. So she said, "Okay, I'll do that." So she started running, and then as they put the team together, they said, "We need somebody to throw the shot," which is that heavy metal ball that you see at the Olympics where
Mm-hmm.
you spin around and throw this very heavy, it looks like a cannonball almost.
Yeah.
So they had no one to throw the shot. So Cathy said, "I'll do that." Now she had literally never even held one.
Oh my goodness.
But I remember my father used to mow the lawn at the house in Lowell. We had this beautiful house in a very nice neighborhood. And uh, the two youngest, Jack and Cathy, used to walk our rabbit. We had a rabbit, Rob, Robert, Rabbit, Maxwell Esquire. My dad would give all the animals strange names. Um, they would let the rabbit out to romp around in the garden every single afternoon when they got home from high school.
Yeah.
So, as part of that, my sister would be out there after they put the rabbit back in the rabbit hutch. My sister would be out there throwing the shot in the afternoon, practicing.
Mm.
I remember my dad is mowing the lawn a little further into that spring, and he's like, "What are all these dents in the front lawn?" And that's because she had that iron ball
Yeah.
and she was out there all afternoon, like till dark,
Wow.
throwing the shot. And, this is before she'd go in and do her homework. And
Mm-hmm.
Cathy Thomas was the most determined, focused, hardworking individual you've ever met.
Mm.
And so all those dents in the yard, my dad's like, "What is this? We being hit by meteorites?" Was Cathy just once again
Yeah.
showing her determination.
Ugh. Oh, Kathy. Thank you for sharing such lovely stories about her. And I love hearing that. It's really important that we remember that she was her own person too. I think that gets lost a lot when we are talking about victims of crimes. Like, yes, it only goes so far to be like, she was so happy and she was a beautiful woman and she was taken from this world too early. But it's these stories that fill my heart. So thank you for sharing that. I would love to talk about the transition of how Kathy's and Becky's case was covered, starting early on to where we're at today, because we're also looking at different landscapes. Because then you throw in the internet, you throw in bloggers, you have your, independent journalists, investigative journalists. How has that process been over all of these decades?
Well, way back when, um, media didn't cover the fact that Kathy and Becky were gay. Like
Mm,
that wasn't even mentioned. Like
hmm
they didn't say they were same sex couple or that they were lesbian or anything like that. They would just say friends. And
mm,
now, as I got involved in the case, and we have to flash forward a number of years, which I'll get to in a second, but those reporters all knew that Kathy and Becky were gay. And as a
right.
matter of fact, the FBI, and my father was our liaison to the FBI agents, very early on, I don't know if we heard about or maybe even saw some reports where this is in like a couple of days after Kathy and Becky had been killed. The FBI had gone to my sister's apartment. She was working as a stockbroker in Virginia Beach, and they had read all of her letters. They had gone through her apartment. They're looking for clues. Um, and Kathy, in her typical fashion, super organized. She had kept every card and every letter that her friends and family had ever sent
Mm.
her. And they were all organized in these plastic boxes. This is so Cathy Thomas. It's ridiculous. But the FBI agents said in very early on reports, which were shared with my father, the girl is gay and the parents know. In other words, this isn't a secret.
A secret,
Now,
yeah.
interestingly, this would have been Kathy's second lesbian relationship. She had been originally involved with with a shipmate aboard the USS L.Y. Spear, which is a submarine tender. And they ultimately broke up after Kathy was investigated by what was then called the NIS, now is called the NCIS, Naval Criminal Investigative Service.
Mhm.
And Becky, this was only her first romantic relationship with another woman. And unlike the Thomas family, where we all knew that Kathy was gay, and my younger brother Jack as well, and we were private about it, but we were all comfortable with it. Becky's family didn't know that she was lesbian, and that's how they found out.
Mm.
Now, I don't learn these things until 23 years later
Wow.
because my parents, remember, we talked about my parents never spoke publicly about the case. That meant
Right.
that we never spoke publicly about
Right.
Kathy's case. So my father acted as the liaison with the FBI, and he spoke with them very frequently. And I took a lot of interest in Kathy's case. So I would talk to my father about what the status was of the investigation into my sister's murder. But we always did this out of earshot of my mom because I can't even tell you what a devastating impact losing Kathy. She, particularly from my mother's point of view, that night when they were found, my mom lost her only daughter, her youngest child, and her best friend. So they were super close. So one of the things I tried to do when I talked to my dad about what was the latest from the FBI, what were the FBI agents working on, who were they looking at as suspects, I would always try to do that um, during the day when I was at my office and my dad was at the University of Lowell. He had moved up from college professor to a assistant dean because it was so upsetting for my mother in particular. And this was something that my parents, particularly my mother, struggled with for the rest of their lives. And I can say definitively, my mother was never the same. She was just diminished. Um, it she just became like a smaller version of herself and even more private than she'd been before.
Yeah.
So I don't really get involved in the media side for 23 years. Now, there was a lot of coverage in the beginning. And then what started happening was approximately a year after Cathy and Becky were found murdered, another couple was found murdered. Robin Edwards and David Knobling were found almost a year later in September 1987, were found shot to death. And this is at Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge, which is about half an hour away from where Cathy and Becky were found on the Colonial Parkway. Interestingly, that's not inside a national park. So that was handled by the Virginia State Police. And then flash forward to April 1988, a young couple on a first date, Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, went missing at the end of their first date. And the car was found, this is Keith's Toyota Celica, is found abandoned on the Colonial Parkway, about a mile and a half or so from where Cathy's car was found, under very similar circumstances. Along the York River, they had these little pretty half-moon pull-offs. And it's probably worth mentioning, the Colonial Parkway is like a 23-mile-long ribbon of national parkland, which was designed to connect three historic sites, Yorktown, Jamestown, and Colonial Williamsburg. And so it's not until the third incident, the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, that the FBI, who are now involved again, because that's a national park, they begin to realize we've got a serious problem here. We've now had a third couple, in this case, go missing, but the car is found in such a similar fashion as to Cathy's Honda Civic being found a year and a half before, that they begin to think we've got a serious problem here, and we think we're dealing with a serial killer. And the local media starts calling these stories the Colonial Parkway Murders. So that moniker is created. And then finally, about a year later, now we're up to 1989, a couple disappears along Interstate 64. And this is Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer. And it's funny, I'm calling them a couple, but they're actually not a couple per se. She's dating Daniel Lauer's brother, Clint, and they're just traveling together down to Virginia Beach. And they go missing along Interstate 64. The car that they're driving is found on Interstate 64, but traveling in the wrong direction. It's a divided highway with rest stops on both sides of the road. And the car is found on the wrong side of the road, that is heading back in the direction of travel, not heading towards Virginia Beach, which was their goal that evening. And they disappear as well. Their bodies are found about 6 weeks later, about a mile from where the rest stop was, in a hunt club. And the bodies are very badly decomposed. It's even hard to figure out cause of death initially. So they begin to refer to these cases. So only two of which are directly tied to the Colonial Parkway murders, Colonial Parkway itself, which is Cathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, and the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley. So those two are FBI cases. And then the murder of Robin Edwards and David Knobling at the Ragged Island site, that's a Virginia State Police case. And then back to Interstate 64 for incident number 4, Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer. That's also a Virginia State Police case. So right off the bat, we have the confusion and lack of coordination between the FBI and the Virginia State Police. And so this is a bifurcated case with at least 2 different agencies, plus local, county, and other folks involved.
Right.
So I don't really get involved until 23 years later, which is a story in and of itself.
That's wild.
I, in September 2009, I was working in Los Angeles for AFTRA, and I was thinking about Cathy and Becky because the 23rd anniversary of their death was coming up. And so it was a few weeks out, and it was evening. I was the executive director, so I'm the boss. Um, and over the course of the evening, a number of people, finish up their workday and head for the door. And I had a tendency to work late, and I did so that night. So it gets to be like around 7 o'clock. And I've got Cathy and Becky kind of whirring through my head with the anniversary coming up. And I just on a whim, I Googled. Now, of course, we're at a post-internet environment.
Yeah.
I Googled Colonial Parkway Murders, those 3 words. And I don't know, something sort of took over, and I started reading every story, whether I'd read it before or not, every story in sequence, one after another, from 7 o'clock to about midnight.
Wow.
So I just sat there. Now,
Wow.
I stopped every once in a while. I'm looking out the window at the Hollywood sign, and except for like the cleaning lady coming in, and I pretty much had the place to myself. And I just kept reading one story after another. I don't really know why. So during the course of that evening, I get to a place where I see a story which ran on WTKR, which is a CBS affiliate. And it's all about how the FBI has lost control of 78 extremely graphic crime scene photos. They've been leaked out into the public.
Yep.
And there's a whistleblowing deputy sheriff who's interviewed by a reporter named Mike Mather. And I was really shocked. I was like, why don't I know about this? Yeah. And why doesn't my family know about this? What the heck is going on? So as I make my way through the stories, I find a second news story, and they're both very long. They're like over 5 minutes, which is a lot of time for a local news broadcast to devote to any story.
Yep.
Usually things are pretty quick, minute or two, they're on to the next story. These are like real in-depth. And there's 2 stories. And the second story, remember now, I've worked in film and television and entertainment, even by that point, for a number of years. One of the things that I was very struck by was while I watched the interviews, they put the assistant special agent in charge, this guy named Brian Hanlon, on the air, which is very unusual. The FBI, if you think about it, they're usually only appearing at press conferences when they're making an announcement, and it's always good news, and it always makes the FBI look great. This is a story that doesn't make the FBI look good at all. Yeah. They're taking a lot of criticism. How did these photos leak? What the heck is going on? But watching this guy, Brian Hanlon, be interviewed, I'd been around this for a long time, and I remember it after we represented broadcasters in addition to actors and other performers. So I knew my way around a television show, and I certainly knew my way around local news. I was watching this guy, and I didn't think he was being truthful. I actually thought, this guy's lying. And then there's a second story, which ran a few days later. Now I'm seeing these back to back. And in the second story, it was very evident that the news station, WTKR, had worked out an arrangement with the FBI. And then, there's negotiations, as you know. There was a second story, which was much more positive, and it was more about here's how we're going to move the case forward, and here's how we're going to make things right. And I thought to myself, this is what they call a give and get. This is, we want somebody to appear on camera to take some of the bullets, if you know what I mean, of the criticism for the FBI, and they don't like to do that. But they did, and they put him on, and you could tell he almost looked like someone was holding a gun to his head off camera, if you know what I mean. Like he was really not happy to be there, but he was going to suck it up and answer these questions. And you could see how the blame was actually being placed on this guy.
Yeah.
But in the second story, it was much more positive. We're going to move this thing forward. We're going to make this right, that kind of thing. And I thought to myself, boy, this is really very, very interesting. But my biggest takeaway was, why don't we know about this?
Mm.
So, as part of that same evening, as I made my way through from 7 to midnight, I also found a Facebook page, which I'd never seen before. And it was called Whatever Happened to Richard Keith Call and Cassandra Haley. Now, it didn't say Colonial Parkway Murders or anything like that, but it was put together by the families of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley. And in it, there were lots and lots of posts. They would put up articles. They linked to these news stories. There was a lot of discussion by people in Virginia and elsewhere concerned about this case, what's happening, what happened to Keith and Sandy, et cetera. And I decided, again, kind of on a whim, to write to the administrators of this page. So I wasn't 100% certain. I knew they were family members. Remember now, 23 years have gone by. My family's never discussed this case publicly.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether these people were going to tell me to go pound sand, as in like, where the heck you been for the last 23 years, Bill Thomas? But so I wrote to them though, and I wrote the same email I've sent probably hundreds of times since.
Wow.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm the older brother of Cathy Thomas, who together with her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski, were the first two victims in the Colonial Parkway murders. And then I continued, I was wondering if I might be able to talk to you about this. Now, I rattle off that sentence because I've written it so many times, I have it memorized because I've written to so many people over the years about the case. Now, I didn't know how they were going to react, but they reacted very kindly. So they wrote back, I think that night, and said they would love to talk to me.
Wow.
So, thank God it was the Call family, Joyce Call and her brother Keith. And these are, brother Chris. And these are Keith's, two of his older siblings.
Okay.
So they were very kind. And that started a conversation about how we might work together to move the Colonial Parkway murders forward. One thing Chris Call said to me later was, in the very early going, like that led into a weekend, and I ended up messaging back and forth with Joyce and Chris Call. And one of the things I said early on was, I think we might be able to leverage the FBI's embarrassment about losing control of the crime scene photos. We might be able to leverage that embarrassment to force, that was the word I used, to force them to put resources into the Colonial Parkway murders. And they thought that was a great idea. So I ended up having a lengthy telephone conversation with Chris, Joyce, and myself. And we started brainstorming about how we might work together. As it turns out, the Call and Haley families, Keith and Sandy's families, had done a lot of work together and with other families in Virginia to keep the case moving forward. And remember, my family had been very hands-off for 23 years.
Right.
And in those first few days, then they introduced me to a number of other people, the other families that were impacted by the Colonial Parkway murders. So I ended up having the initially very awkward conversation with Rebecca Dowski's older brother. If on some level, one of the reasons why I was struggling, and I'm even struggling now, was I was embarrassed because we'd never even spoken.
Yeah.
Because we'd never met Becky.
Yeah.
And as my mom said, and remember, she kind of dictated back then, what do you say to someone who was killed with your sister or daughter, um, that you've never even met.
Yeah.
So here it is 23 years later. I reached out to Bob Dowski and introduced myself. And even he said in that conversation, well, the girls supposedly were gay or something like that. Like even to that point, he hadn't necessarily accepted the fact that Cathy and Becky were gay lovers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not criticizing. I'm just,
Yeah.
making the
Yeah.
observation. But I ended up kind of stepping forward then, and with the Colin Haley family's help, I ended up like reaching out to various family members to learn more about the case.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we started doing, and I know these are areas you're very comfortable talking about, was realizing we could work together even more closely, and I could get involved. And of course, I had this background as an advocate, and I'd done all this legislative work. And so my partner Pamela says sometimes things happen at the right time for the right reason. And she
Mm-hmm.
said maybe the reason you didn't get involved right away was because you needed to have that life and work experience that allowed you to, put that to good use, but you wouldn't have had that in 1986. But you move forward to 2009, and you've done a lot of other things in your professional life that were directly applicable to trying to move something like the Colonial Parkway murders forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Pamela. That's profound.
She's very
And it's
wise. She's very wise.
yeah, I mean, and it's true, and it's such a it's wild to like think about that, but I think she's absolutely right. Different life experiences. Obviously, now you knew how the media worked. You knew how the sausage was made, and so that I mean, best way to put it, and so we now know, especially since from 2009 to 2025 today. We're talking about, again, people bringing these cases and stories to the media. So hearing that you were able to make that connection and start as like a collaboration, almost to getting justice for all of you. And it's maddening to me to hear all the different jurisdictions, all the little nuances that go into that, because I'm very familiar with how that all worked with the Bundy cases and and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
why he got away for so long, because this kind of stuff can be intentional, to throw law enforcement off. So kudos to you for reaching out to the Call family and then, reaching out to Becky's brother. I can't imagine how on a personal level, either cathartic or healing or starting that process, because now this is a journey. So from there, you are now seeing the rise of like true crime,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And
Oh,
and
yeah.
and in the media, because this is also a time now where tabloids are also very prevalent. We're seeing this shift in Hollywood of like, we want information, we want access, we want every detail. So now we're transitioning into this landscape that we are still in today, and I would say even more charged than back then. Where was that fine line then for you of like, it's time for me to start talking?
Well, it's funny. I think it occurred to me in those first few days in talking to the Call family and then being introduced to the other families that there was an opportunity there.
Mhm.
And I started, and the FBI knows this, and I've had uh, sometimes heated relationship with the FBI teams that have been investigating Cathy and Becky's case. That would be the understatement of the year. But it occurred to me that we could start to build some pressure. And so I started coaching. Remember, I had that background. I
Right.
started coaching these other families.
Mhm.
I wrote up talking points and started um, talking to them, asking them who would be willing to appear in local news broadcasts, in interviews, who might be willing to talk to the newspaper. And so we started expressing our outrage about the leak of the crime scene photos.
Okay.
And the next thing you know, we're starting to get a lot more traction in Virginia, and a lot more newspaper stories, a lot of internet. And this is a little before true crime podcasts had taken off.
Right.
But we started to get some traction, and we started really hammering the crap out of the FBI and the Virginia State Police for their screw ups in this case. Why weren't there any answers 23 years later? Are they ever going to solve this case? Where are we with resources? So we started hammering on them. And finally, by November of that year, the special agent in charge, this is the boss now, very nice guy named Alex J. Turner. Alex, he went by AJ. AJ Turner and I had started exchanging messages, speaking on the phone. And he finally came back to me in November, after a couple of months now, September, October, November. We, went through the anniversary time frame of Cathy and Becky's death. He finally came back to me and said, "Okay, we get it. Enough. Can you lighten up on us a little bit?" Mm-hmm. And he proposed that we meet in Virginia. Originally, it was going to be in December, and then it got pushed to January. They were trying to dictate to us when it was going to be, and we were like, "No." They wanted it to be the week before Christmas.
Oh.
Which was convenient for them, the FBI agents, but it sure wasn't convenient for all of us. And remember, not all the families are from Virginia. I was living in California, et cetera. They were trying to dictate to us, and we were like, "No, we're not going to do this." January after the new year works for us. And we began to assert ourselves much more strongly than we ever had before, that we weren't going to always be dictated to. So they flew us in from around the country. They paid to put us up. I understand this is very unusual. And they met with us, and they had a 6-hour meeting where they briefed us from top to bottom on what was going on with the Colonial Parkway Murders investigation. I was very struck by how many lawyers there were in the room. And of course, now I know a lot more about, they were concerned about their own liability. And they'd done a terrible job on this investigation. There's the crime scene photos leak. The FBI had ordered my sister's rape kit and Becky Dowski's rape kit destroyed as medical waste 8 years after their murders in a bureaucratic foul up. They literally burned their rape kits as medical waste.
Oh my gosh.
And you're like, what? And then they wouldn't. One thing that's really appalling about the FBI, they will never, ever admit they've made a mistake. So they struggled to admit that leaking the crime scene photos was a mistake. The photos had actually been stolen by a former FBI photographer. They wouldn't admit that burning Cathy and Becky's rape kits was medical waste. That was improper. And I remember the chief medical examiner for the Commonwealth of Virginia said to me, "Mr. Thomas, you never destroy evidence in an unsolved murder case." And I said, "Well, did they, was it a storage issue?" She said, "No, there are 2 boxes about the size of if you ordered business cards, a little
oh my box. Goodness."
She said to me privately, and again, people will tell me things and be very outspoken. And she said, "I don't care what the FBI tells you. That was a huge mistake." And she said, "I understand that your sister, Ms. Dowski, were not raped according to the standards of 1986 technology." But she said, "You never know what's going to come online in 2010. Think about how prescient she was in saying this." there'll be new tests that will come online that could be very valuable. And she said, even if your sister and Ms. Dowski were not raped, they provided very clean DNA samples for future testing. She said this should have never happened. And she said, Mr. Thomas, I don't care what lies the FBI says to you, it's not true. And this was not the last time I would have to call the FBI out for lying. And I hate saying that. I'm actually pulling for their success. But one of the reasons why there's been a lot of heat sometimes behind closed doors between me and the FBI is because I've had to call them out on their lies. And look, they are what they are. The institution is only interested in protecting itself and solving cases and justice and things, these kind of altruistic goals that we all have. That's not job one at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's number one job is always to make themselves look good. So this has become sometimes a bit of a struggle. And over the ensuing years since 2009, I've had to take more and more of, I'm crazy about these words, but a leadership role, whatever. I didn't sign on for this. It just sort of developed organically.
Yeah.
But that meant that I got much more involved with the media. And then, of course, that leads us into what you were referencing a moment ago, Celine Beth, about kind of the modern era of true crime television, true crime podcasts, etc.
Yes. Well, first and foremost, that whole story is disheartening and disturbing, to say the least. I am a very outspoken person about rape kits and how they are handled, and my local news knows that very well,
Oh, yeah.
and where I stand when it comes to evidence. And you're right, it's really hard. I think this is another really difficult thing that I would love to call out as a true crime producer and a trauma survivor myself. It's, we rely so heavily on law enforcement. We put a lot of our faith into that justice will be sought for your family, for yourself, whomever. And I'm no stranger to FBI agents, FBI offices. I've been with the US Marshals, when we're talking about the Walsh family, I have seen so many different sides, is basically what I'm trying to say. I've seen amazing agents, and I have seen some that I'm like, all right, well, more work needs to be done here. So, I so appreciate you sharing that, because I think you're right. There is this level of protection of the FBI upholding what they stand for, but it's these moments that we also need to recognize. It's not just, hey, we made a capture and that's it. It's the nuances. It's the destruction of evidence. And again, yeah, I mean, this person was correct. Look at now we have CODIS and all the different DNA testing. So that, which is just mortifying to hear that these rape kits are gone and just up in smoke. No pun
Yeah.
intended.
Yeah.
It's
What a waste. What a
yes.
waste.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And it saddens me. And I am a fan and a supporter of law enforcement. I want to
Yes.
see law enforcement succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there are things that people don't want to talk about. There
Yeah.
are 300,000 unsolved homicides, cold case homicides in the United States, and tens of thousands, as you know, of unsolved sexual assaults as well.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody wants to talk about this. Now, this is where the Department of Justice should be stepping up, but they're
Right.
not.
Right.
And this is where the FBI, Virginia State Police, and local and state law enforcement across the country should be stepping up, but they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody wants to talk about the fact that there's 300,000 unsolved homicides here in the United States, many of which could be solved if we put, and you'll hear me say this more than once today, time, attention, and resources into solving those cases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Preach it. Yep. 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 So, with that being said, now, because we have this side of it, and you started touching on, again, reports and media, the inaccuracies, all those things start trickling in. But segueing into this new era of true crime and armchair detectives and people who can Google a case, pull it up, and either start recording a podcast, start a documentary. It takes a whole new mind of its own. And I feel like this shift really started popping up, at least for me, in like 2016. So we're talking about 7 years later after this first experience for you.
Right.
So from there, now we're starting to see true crime being used not necessarily as a resource, if you will, but we're now going into full entertainment factor because me as a millennial, an elder millennial, I was watching Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted as a child. And so now then fast forwarding to me as an adult and as a trauma survivor, and I'm seeing this, these stories, but then finding out, oh, there's comedy podcasts about true crime.
Oof.
Well, I learned all of this once I started my Bundy project and really digging into what is true crime entertainment. And oh boy, was I here for a rude awakening of what that was.
Oh, yeah.
And so it now creates a whole new issue, if you will, when it comes to trying to solve an unsolved homicide case. And in this instant, multiple homicides. From your own personal opinion, when you start learning about people who are talking about the colonial murders in this type of fashion, or you're seeing people suggesting, different podcasts or whomever cover these stories, what does that do to you as a brother, as an advocate, seeing this, especially because they're not coming to you, they're not coming to your families asking for permission, they're not interviewing you to make sure they have this information. They're going off of the internet. And like I said, as I know and you know damn well, whatever is written in an article is most likely not all factual. So we have that issue. But when you have commentary from people on the internet and strangers discussing these things that could potentially convolute an investigation or compromise it, because I have seen those situations start playing
Yeah.
out.
Oh, yeah. Us
Where,
too.
yeah, where do you stand with that?
Well, remember, as the brother of a murder victim, and now I'm wearing the advocate hat, which I
Mhm.
didn't ask for, but it just sort of developed. I only have a limited number of cards I can play.
Mhm.
Media pressure, to quote our friend Julie Murray,
Yes.
works. And,
Yes.
I've got X number of cards I can play as the brother of a murder victim to build pressure
Mhm.
on, in our case, the FBI and the Virginia State Police to put resources into this case. They
Mhm.
did react to all those negative stories that ran in Virginia media. We did newspaper, we did internet, we did radio, we did TV.
Yeah.
And they come back to us a couple months later. And this was a campaign just like any other. They came back and said, whoa, whoa, we hear you. We're going to put a full time case agent back on the case, which was fantastic news. And, you start to see how the media can be helpful to you and other
Mhm.
families when you're trying to build awareness. You're trying to shine that media spotlight on your sister's case or whatever it is. It does work.
Yeah.
And so what I began to look at was I see the true crime entertainment thing starting to take off. Now there's all these podcasts. And as you were saying, the barriers to entry for podcasting are very low. I mean, you have a
Mhm.
computer and a microphone, you can pretty much get started podcasting. That doesn't mean you're bringing any expertise to it or whatever, although over time Some people have gotten to be quite good at it. But I begin to look like I look at everything, which is there some benefit that would help us as a group of families in like participating in an interview with this television show, newspaper, these new true crime podcasts. So I start looking at the true crime podcast space. We start discussing it on our Facebook pages, which is where most of us got started in terms of social media. Which podcasts are people listening to? Which podcasts do people recommend? What shows do they recommend we take a look at? And I'm trying to sort out the good from the bad. And I'm not a rabid consumer of true crime media, but I do try when someone approaches me particularly to evaluate whether that person is someone that could be beneficial to us and perhaps us to them. So usually what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out if I'm in touch with someone, they reach out to me, I reach out to them. If what they're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to accomplish, if I can get the overlap to be, say, 70% or more, I'll usually try to find a way to work with them. But there are times when I think to myself, I don't think so. And so, for example, I don't want to sound like the bitter older brother, but I still have to say this. I'm not very comfortable with the mix of comedy and true crime. I have a lot of joy in my life. I love to laugh. I like comedy, but I don't see how true crime, we're not talking about made up stories here. This isn't you and I writing a script. This is real life. This happened to real people, whether it's you or me or any number of other people. I don't get the mix between real tragedy, which is what we're talking about, offense to good people, whether it's rape or murder or whatever it is, sex trafficking. It's not funny. It's never going to be funny. And I don't get it. So, for example, my favorite murder, at one point, when we were building some visibility, a number of listeners to the My Favorite Murder podcast had said to Karen and Georgia, who run Exactly Right and produce that podcast, they had said, you should cover the Colonial Parkway murders. And I listened to the podcast and I'm like, I don't think so. Yeah. And so all I said on Twitter was, let's not. That's all I said. And interestingly, they reached out to me privately and said, we get it. Yeah. Because the fans were saying, can you cover the Colonial Parkway murders? And here's the spokesperson for the Colonial Parkway murders saying, no, let's not. Yeah. And they wrote to me privately. They were very respectful. And they said, we get it. We understand. Because I just didn't want to see them using the murder of 8 young people as a jumping off point for, I'm going to be very frank here, for their self-involved, endless chat about themselves, followed by a crude rip and read from Wikipedia. Because that's really what it is. Yeah. And then comedic bits. I'm sorry, I don't get it. And I'll take it a step further. I'm not going to name names here, but I remember several years later when I met the survivors from the Golden State Killer case. Yes. One of them asked me, have you ever heard of this podcast? And I said, yes. And she said, I listened to it the other day. Now, this is a survivor. Yeah. And she said, Bill, they're making fun of us. They're laughing at us. Now, Karen and Georgia can object all they want. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is they're using other people's tragedy as a jumping off point for their comedy. They're not alone. There's a bunch of others, some of whom I think are actually worse.
Oh, I know one.
Yeah, I know a couple that, but I'm as much as I appreciate comedy and I have lots of joy in my life. And, I've never met Karen and Georgia. I'm sure they're lovely people,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't support what they're doing. Never have, never will. And I'm not the only survivor who feels exactly the same way.
Yep.
So I try to evaluate opportunities to
Mm-hmm.
work together, through that lens. Can I help them? Can they help us?
Yeah.
And a lot of times it works. And don't misunderstand me. Years later, my podcast partner Kristin Dilley and I started our own podcast
Mm-hmm.
called Mind Over Murder. And I'm going to point something out here. Our podcast name is actually a commentary on their podcast name, because who the hell has a favorite murder?
Thank you.
Are
Yes.
you serious?
Yep.
Now, they've built a brand around this, and I'm not claiming that our little podcast competes with theirs, far from it. But when we started our podcast, we had 100 names,
Mm-hmm.
and then you know, I wrote them all down. I'm not joking. We had 100 names, page
Oh, I
after
believe
page
it.
after page. And then this is a brainstorming session with my podcast partner, Kristin Dilley, my life partner, Pamela Arnois, and myself. Came up with what we thought were 100 great names. And then I went back and tried to determine if they were already being used. So 85 of them get crossed off the list because they are too close to or exactly the same name as. And all the good one word names like criminology and stuff like that were already taken.
Gone. Yeah.
So you end up with 2 and 3 word names.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately we ended up with a bunch of what I thought were pretty good names. And Mind Over Murder actually is a very indirect commentary on their very distasteful choice of a podcast name. Now, too late to change the name of their podcast, and I'm not trying to make this all about them.
Mm-hmm.
But what we tried to do was, I did participate in a number of different podcasts as a guest talking about the Colonial Parkway murders.
Right.
And a number of them said to me on and off the air, "You're really good at this." And a number of them said, "You should consider doing your own podcast."
Wow.
And I thought, well, the last thing the world needs is another white guy of a certain age. That would be me pontificating about anything on the internet, politics or cooking or sports or whatever.
Yeah.
So one of the things I thought about was I had been working with Kristin Dilley, who's a wonderful writer and teacher and researcher, and she lives in Williamsburg. She'd followed the case from back when she was a teenager.
Okay.
And she'd been incredibly helpful to me behind the scenes in the Colonial Parkway murders. And remember, she lives locally. And while I was living in California and elsewhere, I'd ask her for her assistance. And she was incredibly helpful and smart and thoughtful. So she heard some of these podcasters say on the air, Bill, you should start your own true crime podcast. And Kristin heard that. She said, that's a great idea. And I said, tell you what, I'll do a podcast on true crime, Kristin Dilley, if you'll do a podcast, because that way we have more than just my perspective. Mm-hmm. So now we have a woman and a man. Mm-hmm. She's younger than I am. She grew up in Virginia, because we do talk about the Colonial Parkway murders, but we talk about lots of other things too.
Yeah.
And it provided that different perspective. We grew up in different parts of the country. She grew up with the Colonial Parkway murders as a teenager, even being told, when she was dating, don't go out on the Colonial Parkway. It's a dangerous place at night, that sort of thing.
Wow.
But interestingly, even though we come from different backgrounds, different parts of the country, there's an age difference, et cetera, we have a very strong commitment to never squashing the other person's opinion. But what's fascinating is I would say we agree about 98% of the time.
Wow.
because
That's amazing.
we all want the same things. We all want cases to move forward. We all want to see some justice. We want to, keep advancing this case and others. So I think that two people from different places coming together for a thoughtful conversation. Again, there's the mind part of it.
Right.
We wanted to, we thought it was kind of pretentious to say thoughtful true crime or something like that. Well, actually, maybe that's not a bad name. But we got started with that several years after I had initially done all of these podcast interviews. What I tried to do is pick the podcasts and news programs and reporters, et cetera, that I thought would provide a more of a nuanced, respectful approach to true crime. Not all of them do.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've been approached by some stuff where you're like, really? Like, people approaching me saying, do you have anything of your sisters that we could put in our serial killer museum?
Oh, Lord.
And where can I see these crime scene photos that were leaked by the FBI? Now, I want to be clear here. These are 78 of the most graphic photos I've ever seen. I wish I had never seen them, but obviously, when every media person in Virginia had a copy of them, one of them said, "Do you want them?" And I said, "Yes." So I have them too. What we're looking for is not that. Don't ask me for things that belong to my sister so you can put them in your serial killer museum, or where can I get a copy of the crime scene photos? Some people are just unbelievably clueless and thoughtless. And you even see it in the comments. I try to be respectful of everybody. I really do. But there are times when I think to myself, wow.
Yeah.
You really think, and I consider myself a little bit of an armchair detective too. But let's try to remember these are real people. This really happened to these people, and their loved ones are still living with that. And in some cases, you're actually talking to survivors of whether it's sexual assault, trafficking, attempted murder, what have you. You're actually talking to the person who survived. Kathy Rubin, who's a survivor of Ted Bundy, who's just
You
the most
did.
amazing, wonderful person.
Oh.
I want to hear her story. I don't want to hear about, how brilliant and handsome Ted Bundy was. Give me an effing break. I want to hear about survivors. I want to hear about cases getting solved. I want to hear about dogged investigators and forensics experts. And so these are the people we try to have on our podcast. And one of the things we've tried to do with Mind Over Murder is, because I've been involved in the Colonial Parkway murders for all these years, I've met like amazing people like yourself, and people that I admire and I feel like I can learn something from. And Kristin feels the same way. Yeah. So when we meet somebody, an investigator, a book author, we interview a lot of authors that are writing about true crime in a non-sensationalistic way. When we talk to forensics experts and psychologists and criminologists and all these fascinating fields, I feel like what an opportunity to see if we can get them to come and talk with us.
Yeah. And
we'll learn. I'm learning every single day. And we try to take our listeners along for the ride.
I love it. It just speaks to who you are, along with Julie, along with Sarah Turney, Tara Newell. I am no stranger to say, and I'm more than happy to say this on my own podcast. I am so sick and tired of people who have no business, discussing these crimes. doing so, making thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on the backs of the trauma survivors who are
Huh?
screaming in a, what feels like sometimes just a room, just a dark room. No one else is in there. You're just screaming for yourself. And I love that you have taken that power back and you're putting it forth and you're, if anything, y'all are educating people. Because again, like, we see this time and time again, and I know since I've broken into the true crime industry 8 years ago, the the roller coaster of life has really taken over my life because yeah, I mean, I wasn't aware of My Favorite Murder until I started my Bundy project. And then when I did listen to it, I was completely mortified because I heard a live show, first of all, where they told the story about Ted in Seattle and hearing the crowd's responses.
What did they do?
Oh boy. They are cheering. They are hooting and
Hearing what?
hollering. They are literally telling the story of Ted Bundy.
But what are
And
they
and
cheering for? I don't understand.
y- your best guess is mine. Cheering of like, oh yeah, and then Ted went to the University of Washington and like everyone's like, go
Like
Huskies.
something to be proud of?
It's wild. And so that was my first listen, was that. And I remember going
Wow.
back to my team and I was like, okay, so first of all, I am mortified. I don't know why these women were cheering. I don't I'm so confused and I'm so concerned.
Yep.
Lo and behold, then I get the attention of My Favorite Murder. And I had to make a whole lot of big mistakes in those early years when I started on this project. And as I shared with you, I have met Georgia and Karen. I have had, a wonderful conversation with them. They continued, to amplify my project and me as a, woman of color in this space. And, I appreciate those things. But to piggyback off of what you said, there was always this like internal struggle of
Mhm.
of listening to these stories, knowing how inaccurate a lot of them were, and just like as you said, go to Wikipedia and you pull all this information and they're not the only ones, right? We have seen plagiarism from other very massive, true crime podcasts. We have seen the downfall of certain, individuals who were also really big named in this industry who became my abuser. The landscape of this true crime industry is so wild, and I always refer to it as the Wild West. And it is just like, how do we have our rights stripped from us when it comes to storytelling and doing so without consent? And consent is my new favorite topic when it comes to true crime
Yep.
because we have to start talking about it and we have to start being really hard asses. Because now, I'm going to segue into this because being a trauma survivor myself, as a producer, as an advocate, as a podcast host, as everything under the sun, I now see true crime entertainment in a very drastic way. And
Hmm.
and and merely being because I know how the sausage is made, as I've
Yeah.
said, especially when it comes to true crime. This is why this podcast exists, and this is why you're sitting here with me this morning. Like,
Sure.
because it's like if we don't call it out, it's never going to change. So, me being in the space of television and film, I know firsthand what it takes to get somebody in the chair, first of all, to sit down and go through the most traumatic moments of their life. And this is something that I do not mess around with. Any production company who has ever hired me knows how intense I am, and it has only intensified over the years, uh, because I'm so passionate about taking care of my trauma survivors first and foremost. And I have now been put in a position where I cannot back a project that I produced on, which is the most disheartening thing for me to say. Um, it strips me from being able to promote it, to promoting, the trauma survivors that I got their stories out there. And again, and it's this losing your autonomy. It's losing the core of why you're doing this, and it becomes exploitive and salacious and all the things that mortify me about this industry and why this podcast exists. So when you and I first really sat down and connected, we started sharing our experiences of what it's been like, going to the media, having the media come to you, asking to share your stories. There's got to be this vetting process. There's got to be, certain ways to protect ourselves. But the one thing that, we kind of came back to was like, you create what you envision in your head of like the perfect way to tell your family member's story and their case and the other cases involved. But then when you finally sit down and you get to listen or watch the product, and it is not what you envisioned, and it is not what was explained to you, it is not your reality. Can you talk to me about what that's been like for you over the years?
I don't want to make it sound like I think that the true crime television industry is the only offender, but
Oh, yes, right.
I think they are. I think they're pretty egregious.
Hmm.
They, I was involved in a production which was supposed to be called the Colonial Parkway Murders, and then the Oxygen Network, for reasons that were never explained to me,
Hmm.
changed the name of the project to the Lovers Lane Murders, and we did a 4-part series on the Colonial Parkway Murders. And most people that are in my category, that is, survivors, advocates, most of the people I've talked to so far, which is probably a lot of people over
Yeah.
the years,
Yeah.
um, most of us who've been through that process end up coming out of the other end of it feeling like hamburger, like we've been
Yeah.
chewed up and spit out.
Yeah.
And this very cynical business. And remember, I worked as a senior exec for
Hmm.
SAG-AFTRA and the American Federation of Musicians and the Art Directors Guild and ASCAP before that. So I've been around entertainment and film and television for a number of years. It's a really cynical business. I get it.
Hmm.
But man, the true crime space, particularly on the TV side, is unbelievably cynical, and they will exploit and use whatever they think will make money and grab eyeballs in the most grotesque ways. And I remember, I'm always trying to find ways to keep shining the media spotlight on my sister's case and other unsolved cases because, like we talked about, I only have a limited number of cards that
Right.
I can play. Media pressure does work, but man, you end up walking away from these true crime, particularly television projects, just feeling like I think I want to go take 10 showers. I
Yes.
just feel like I have been used and abused. Let me give you a couple of examples in the Lovers Lane Murders, which if people want to go out and watch it, please feel free. There's a lot there's
Mhm.
good aspects to it, and it certainly helped shine the media spotlight on our case. But I had provided those graphic crime scene photos,
Mhm.
which had been leaked by the FBI. I had a copy of them. I provided those photos to the producers of the show because they were trying to do analysis. And remember, we don't have full access to the case
Exactly.
files and so
Right.
on. So you've got to go with what you've got. If you're trying to educate former law enforcement people that are working on this case with you, they have to have some understanding of what the heck happened when we talk about the Colonial Parkway murders. But let me give you a specific example. I had heard that had heard the producers talking, and I was a consulting producer in this project. They were talking about a presentation piece, a 20, and this will be familiar for you, a 20-minute presentation piece on the series that was going to be presented to senior execs at the network. And this is where they have those off-site meetings and they review a whole bunch of programs, and they're going to figure out which programs are going to get greenlit. That is, we're moving forward, or not, we're not moving forward. So there's a 20-minute video presentation piece, and I'm a consulting producer, so I'm not driving the bus, but I'm on the bus. And I keep asking, when are you going to send me this presentation piece? I want to see this presentation piece. And they keep dragging their feet and dragging their feet. And weeks go by and weeks turn into months. And I'm like, I'm busy, but every once in a while, I'll say to them, are you ever going to send me this video? And finally, it just occurs to me, something's not smelling right here. And I said, I need you to send this to me today. And they did. And of course, then I found out why they weren't sending me a copy of the presentation piece. Now, remember, this wasn't designed for broadcast. It wasn't going to be put out on the air, but it was going to be presented to a group of senior executives in some conference room somewhere, more than once. It's 20 minutes long. It's pretty well done, but it has those horrible crime scene photos are splashed throughout the 20 minutes. This is my sister's nude body on an autopsy table with a head wound that's pretty close to decapitation. How in the hell do they need to include these horrific photos of dead nude bodies in a room full of executives that are going to be deciding whether or not you're going to greenlit the show? That's why they didn't want me to see that presentation piece. And even when we got to air, what did they do? They lightly masked the crime scene photos. You can still tell what's going on.
Yeah, right.
And so I said these need to be taken out. And of course, I was told that they were going to be, but they weren't. I was told they were going to be heavily masked. Well, that's not my version of heavily, because I look at the photograph and I'm like, not only can I tell that's my sister, or not only can I tell that's such and such a victim, I can tell exactly what's happened because you guys have barely disguised it. But and then mix in the stings, the music, bah, like so.
Yes,
Kathy's body nearly decapitated, bah, and then the show, excuse me, which is supposed to be 4 episodes, 1, 2, 3, 4, which roughly lines up to, there's 4 double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders, about 1 per year, as we talked about. So you can see how each episode, the center part of it is going to be what happened in that particular double homicide as part of the series of what we call the Colonial Parkway murders. Then why are we constantly throwing back to the most horrible pictures of Cathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski? Because those are the most horrific pictures. And tell me that wasn't intentional. So we're now discussing, Cathy and Becky are the first 2 victims. We're now discussing incident number 2, 3, 4. Why do we keep throwing back to showing Cathy and Becky's battered, decapitated bodies? Because those are the most spectacular, sensational pictures. And remember, in one example, Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, they went missing and were never found. So we don't have any bodies. So if you're looking for shock, which is, let's be honest, that's what they were doing, then, that's not going to work. And then in one of the examples, the bodies were found in an advanced state of decomposition, Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer, incident number 4. So, they had nice close-ups of their skulls in the woods and stuff like that. And you're like, how is this advancing the audience's understanding of this case? How is this helping to tell the story? Do we really need to include all this blood and guts and gore. And then don't even get me started on the reenactments.
Oh boy.
I was there for some of the reenactments. I was there for, most of the shooting and of the show. And
Wow.
I understand that television is a visual medium. I really do. But do we really need to show, graphic reenactments?
No,
Do
not
you,
at all.
we've all seen enough film and television and enough uh, westerns and, horror films and all that stuff to know what's involved when someone gets shot or stabbed or whatever. Do we really need to show real victims? And, I know you've talked about this on your podcast and elsewhere about re-traumatizing
Yes.
victims. Do we really need this? And it's funny, I see programs. I remember when Liz Garbus did the HBO version of I'll Be Gone in the Dark, based on the Michelle McNamara book, and Michelle was a friend. I thought that show was very well done, and it there was spooky aspects to it, and some atmospherics, and some dark settings and that sort of thing. But it didn't go in for the grotesque blood and guts and unnecessarily graphic reenactment.
I will gladly say during my tenure doing true crime television, I cannot express my distaste for reenactments. You will never, ever have a project with my name on it as a director with any reenactments. I've hated them from the jump, and I absolutely hate them today. There is no need. And the reason that this and you've nailed it. I mean, you've nailed every single element to this. We're talking about the music. We're talking about even down to the fonts
Oh,
sometimes.
I was going to say that. They ended up with
Yeah.
the Lover's Lane. They made this bizarre change from the Colonial Parkway Murders, which most people, if they know of the case, they know it by that name.
Mm-hmm.
They changed it to Lover's Lane Murders, maybe because they think they're going to establish a brand. I don't know. And then
Right.
they end up choosing this font that looks just like a 70s slasher film. And you're like,
Oh,
could you please not do this?
do
And of
that.
course, I objected and I objected and I objected, but they tell
Yeah.
you they're going to fix it, but they don't. And
Exactly.
they
Mm-hmm.
completely disregard, the family member, consulting producer, and quite frankly, the single greatest subject matter expert, since law enforcement wasn't participating. People
Right.
tell me that I know more about the Colonial Parkway murders of anyone beyond our investigative agencies, whom I hold in high regard. But they, it, the insensitivity just goes off the charts. Let me give you one other example. They
Yeah.
made a decision after we shot the show. We went to Virginia where the incidents took place, and we shot a lot of amazing interviews, all of which I set up, all of whom are people that participated in the show because I asked them to, many of whom told me, if you weren't involved, I wouldn't do this show, because a lot of them are family members. They don't want to revisit the most painful
Exactly.
experience of their lives.
Right.
They did it because I asked them to. And in
Right.
some cases, I literally begged,
Yeah.
and they said yes. But then we had this very strange situation that develops. They're unhappy with the show. They're unhappy with the production company's output of
Mm-hmm.
the series. And the series seems to go dormant. That we're not
Mm-hmm.
moving forward. And so we go into some version of turnaround, but it doesn't look like the show's ever going to see the light of day. A year or more later, I get a phone call. They're moving forward. They brought in a different production company, and they want to reshoot the series. Now, remember, all those people that did those interviews for hours and hours and hours, they all did it because I asked them to.
Yeah.
They want a different director, a different direction, of course, a different production company to come back in. They want to reshoot the entire series. Now, I naively said, look, there's some beautiful, very poignant and difficult moments in those interviews. You want to redo all those interviews? Can't we reshoot whatever you want to reshoot, keep those interviews with all the family members, etc.? No. So then I have to go back to every single one of those family members and beg them to do it all over again and try to explain to them how Hollywood works and how this would mean a tremendous amount to the success of the show. And every single one of them said yes. But now, if you don't think at that point, I'm not expending a lot of personal political capital, if you know what I mean, with all the other families, literally begging them to come back and do this again. And they all said yes. I'm not saying the second series of interviews weren't also beautiful and thoughtful and poignant. Sadly, most of it ends up on the cutting room floor.
Exactly.
They used some. There was nothing, though, in that second series of interviews that wasn't there in the first series of interviews without causing those people all that unnecessary pain. And yet that's what the network insisted on.
Wow. Yeah. I remember you sharing that, and it's maddening because you're right. And that's the part that gets me, even as a producer, where pretty much everything is on the cutting floor. Like there is the actual stories, the actual emotions, and what really matters never makes it. And I'm starting to call, these interviews and the individuals who are depicted in them as script puppets. They are fitting an actual script, an actual outline, an actual timeline. That's all that it serves. So when I started working on my Bundy project, and I was obviously an amateur filmmaker, had no idea what the hell I was doing, but I couldn't get over how much more of, I don't even want to say story, but the ability to hear how their lives were affected by Bundy without
Exactly.
without even having him be the center of the topic. Yes, we understand what they're sharing is real in relation to him, but it's not about him. It's about them. It's about their experiences. And that's really what I would like to see change when it comes to true crime, because I do see these things starting to be implemented in independent projects and independent filmmaking. There's a wonderful, amazing director by the name of Kim A. Snyder who did the most phenomenal work when it came to Newtown. And in 2020, she released a documentary at Sundance called Us Kids, all in collaboration with the survivors of the Parkland shooting. You also have the collaboration with all of the families from Sandy Hook who wanted to participate.
Right.
There is no recreate. There
You don't,
is.
you don't need it. We know what happened in
We
those.
know what happens. You don't need it. And so rather than focusing on that, I believe she used like drone shots. She used like very,
Little distance from it.
yeah, like breaking up, the talking heads, which is absolutely what you want to do. But there are so many ways to storytell, and Liz Garbus is another one of, these wonderful individuals, along with Aaron Lee Carr.
Oh, well, if there's one thing I could stop, it would be recreations.
Hmm. Yeah, agreed.
But
Because
the
yeah,
people you just described are trying to find a way to tell the
yes,
story.
yes,
And I get it. You can't have endless talking heads.
yep,
And you do have to explain to some level where and when this happened and kind of
yes,
how.
you're right.
But I think we've all seen enough violent film and television, whether it's documentary or fictional. We know what's involved in hurting someone, killing someone, assaulting
Mhm.
someone. You don't need to show it over
No,
and over and over again.
no, no, there's no reason to. And honestly, I think it's more impactful. when you don't use that
Oh,
because
exactly. Show a little taste, a little
yes,
discernment.
right.
And, and I don't mean to just imply that it's only a true crime TV thing, but
No.
I think they're the most egregious offenders
Hmm.
in this category. It I think we can do better. I see true crime
Yes, we can.
television and docs are often more discerning,
Hmm.
but not always.
Hmm.
But there's just a callousness about it that is just appalling, and we have to do better.
Yes. And we have to call it out because nobody wants to call it out. And I don't know why. And it is so re-traumatizing. And I even say it is re-victimizing.
Mhm.
You are literally, if I were, on a documentary series, they wanted to talk about me being drugged and raped and then try to depict it, I would lose it.
Right.
And so now, I tried very heavily to give my own notes about Recre
Hmm.
on this last series, and they were not, you know, used, if you will. They still went ahead and did it the way that they intended to, and which again is harming the trauma survivor on the other end. That
Yep.
this is the story you're trying to tell, but now actually, like, you're harming them doing that. And it is a disgusting reality of this industry. I mean, really, this whole situation has put me in a place where I don't want to do freelance producing for television anymore because unless I know absolutely what their goals are, their ethics, and again, and I don't mean to, repeat myself, but when, coming off of doing In Pursuit with John Walsh and seeing that Recre was never used. That was never a thing, and there is this beauty in being able to watch Callahan sit down with these trauma survivors along with John,
Hmm.
and actually talking to them as
Yeah.
people.
People. Right.
And there isn't this dramatized music. There isn't this, all
It's
like I
not
said,
an action
it's not.
film. It's not a horror film.
No, no,
So
it
why are
is
you trying
reality.
to present it as such? Why are
Yep.
you putting slasher film graphics
Yes.
in
Yes.
the Lovers Lane murders? Why are you doing recreations and casting a really pretty young woman with red hair and blue eyes to play my sister and then cut her throat? I mean, are you serious?
Fuck.
But that's the kind of stuff. And I mentioned to you off the air, I after this experience, I said never again.
Right.
Now, here it is. Flash forward a couple of years. I've been approached, I think without exaggeration, probably dozens of times
I believe
about,
it.
you know, we want to do the Colonial Parkway murders. And I get the same old song and dance. This is about the survivors. This is about the victims. This is about the loss. This is about your family. This is your story. If I heard that one more time, I was going to jump off a bridge.
Yeah.
I've turned most people down.
Hmm.
And usually because what I do is just like everybody else that I talk to, I want to do some research about who is this person and like we talked about, what are their goals versus what are ours, the families.
Hmm. Hmm.
And usually if I have a chance and I talk to somebody, I do some research, I watch some of their projects, and I turn almost everybody down
Yeah.
because most of them I didn't have I don't have much faith in their ability to meet that oh so sincere pitch they gave me at the
Correct.
oh your story is so important, Bill, and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Then I watch a couple of samples of recent productions you've been involved with, and I'm like, hell no.
Hmm.
I don't want
Hmm.
anything to do with you.
Hmm.
um and I'm not looking to rant at people or tell them they're vampires and sycophants but I don't want to do a TV show with them.
Yeah.
No, but remember we talked about the media spotlight has great power.
Correct.
It can be very beneficial. And the FBI and the Virginia State Police, just to personalize this again, they do react to these television shows, newspaper articles, podcasts. I know for a fact they listen to Mind Over Murder because they've called me out on stuff that we've said on our little podcast. We've even joked.
Good.
We've even joked on the podcast that we'd like to thank our listeners from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They have analysts that must be on their list of things to do. If we discuss the Colonial Parkway murders that week, which we don't every week, but if we do, they listen because they come back and they say, we really didn't like when you said this. They've even asked me a couple of times to take things out if they felt like it was a little too close to a particular suspect or whatever. That sort of thing I'm willing to consider.
Yeah.
But generally, I say no to far more things than I say yes to.
Yep.
And even the things I've said yes to, I've ended up walking away thinking, oh, man.
Yeah.
The things that keep me up late at night, Celine, are I lie there trying to get to sleep thinking, how many more compromises do I have to make in order to tell the story of the Colonial Parkway murders? And it shouldn't be like that.
No,
but more of the shows that I see, and I don't watch them all, but more of the shows that I see miss the mark than come close.
Exactly. And there needs to be a reckoning. And that is, hey, we're in revolution mode. That's really how I feel about this industry. I love it. I think there is benefit to sharing stories. I mean, especially as a sexual assault survivor, DV survivor, it helps others recognize, their stories and their traumas. Now, with that being said, you are right. At what point does it become too much? But I know the importance that it serves. So one of the things that I would love to touch on, one of my last couple questions, because Bill, I already know, like, we're going to have to do a part 2 with you. But I want to go back to Michelle McNamara, because one of the things that you said to me was that she actually wrote up a piece about the Colonial Parkway murders, and the way that she did this really impacted you. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, this is something I'd like to see these come back. When I met Michelle through mutual friends a number of years ago, I was living in West Hollywood. She reached out to me and wanted to interview me about the Colonial Parkway murders. And she came to my apartment and we met several times. And I really, really liked her. She was really smart, very thoughtful, very kind. I knew she was working on a book on what she came to call the Golden State Killer case, which had been called a number of things over the years. So she ended up doing a 2-parter, print interview with me for something that she called True Crime Diary. And it was a series of interviews and case analysis that she had done on other cases, not the Golden State Killer case. They were beautifully written, and her questions were so good and so thoughtful. And she ended up doing a 2-parter on the Colonial Parkway murders, and it was up that is on the web for a number of years. And then I don't know, a year or so ago, I noticed that it went down. I can't find it anymore. I think it's very unfortunate because obviously Michelle passed away. I saw her a week or 2 before she passed. We had breakfast, one of those three-hour breakfasts, which is not dissimilar to this one, except we're Not in the same
recording
cafe. Yeah.
it.
Um, I wish those stories were still available. I actually thought that obviously Michelle had passed unexpectedly and very tragically. I actually thought if you wanted to put out a second book of Michelle's writing, those
Wow.
true
Yeah.
crime diary stories would make a phenomenal book. I'd buy it,
Yeah.
not just because she covered the Colonial Parkway murders, because I read some of the other stories. They were beautifully, thoughtfully written. And
Mhm.
now they seem to be gone. Now, I don't know her former husband
Mhm.
and don't have any contact with him, but I would think he would control her output, her work.
Right. Her archive, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see those stories, all of them, not just the one on the Colonial Parkway murders. But man, I've read it several
Yeah.
times, and I might have printed it out and put it somewhere. I've got so many
I would imagine.
files.
Yeah.
There's this podcast studio slash office, and then there's hundreds and hundreds of additional files out in our
Yeah.
guest house.
Yeah.
But maybe I printed them out, but now I'm sorry I didn't because they're so well written. I'd love
Mhm.
to see that additional work of Michelle's see the light of day somehow. All,
Agreed.
all of it, not just on our case.
Yeah.
I think it's a real loss. Obviously, losing her in the unexpected way that we all did was very sad. Now it's funny. I knew her. We weren't like best friends or anything, but we'd had
Yeah.
breakfast several times. Um, and they would turn into marathons. Like it would be after she had dropped their daughter off at school,
Yeah.
and then I was living in West Hollywood, and we would go to this cafe around the corner with great breakfasts. But I remember on more than one occasion, somehow breakfast segued into lunch because we'd be at it for hours. Because I really wanted to
Yeah.
hear what she was working on, and
Mhm.
she was always asking me, how are things going with Cathy's case. And one sad moment is that I saw her a week or two before she died, and I remember I thought to myself that she looked terrible. And she
Yeah.
she even told me, and again, we were not like intimates, but she even told me she was having difficulty sleeping, and
Mm.
you know the case was really weighing heavily. We're talking about the Golden State Killer case, was weighing very heavily on her. And she told me some inside baseball stuff that I was like, whoa, like
Yeah.
how she had acquired files from law enforcement and
Yeah.
legitimately. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, but I remember thinking to myself, she looked terrible.
Yeah.
But you don't tell somebody, particularly a woman,
Yeah. Yeah.
geez, you look like crap. It just,
Yeah.
but I remember thinking it,
Mhm.
my gosh, you need to take a week off and, get
Oh,
some sleep and
yeah.
lie on a
Oh,
beach or take a nap or something.
right.
And so that part saddens me deeply. I thought the book was very well done, and
Mhm.
I thought that the television series, as I mentioned, directed by Liz Garbus, I thought was based on the book was extremely well done.
I agree.
And so that, by the way, gives me some hope that
Mhm.
it can be done. You can tell a compelling true crime story in a way that is respectful.
Yes.
And this is where, you know, people that I respect immensely, like Sarah Turney and Julie Murray and others, I think have set out a kind of a north star for all of us to
Mhm.
we need to do better.
Mhm. Agreed. Wholeheartedly agree. Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. And it goes without saying, I'm so sorry for the loss of Michelle. But when you shared that with me, that was really profound because, I didn't know her, but again, just reading her book and, I'll Be Gone in the Dark was very, very pivotal, especially again in terms of talking about rape in the 70s. I thought was very, very well done and so respectful, and I appreciated all of that. So I agree. Okay, well, I've got one of my last questions for you before I do rapid fire questions
Oh my.
to leave on a high note.
Mhm.
But my last question to you, Bill, for any trauma survivor who is listening, whether, the crimes were committed against them, against a family member, a loved one, what do you want them to know when it comes to the media in Hollywood and what your advice would be?
Well, I think it's really important. I think this advice would hold too with working with law enforcement as well. I think it's very important that you think long and hard about what it is you want and what you need, and you need to assert yourself. And I urge everybody to to think carefully about what it is they're trying to achieve
Mhm.
in this relationship. And I've struggled with this. Now, people have told me, like in our relationship with the FBI, I've been incredibly assertive, perhaps too much so. Um, I've strongly criticized them. I did in this podcast.
Mhm.
I said they lied repeatedly because they have
Yeah.
repeatedly. I remember blowing up at our FBI agent. And I'm not proud of this. My mom would not be proud of me for losing my temper. But you have got to figure out how to not lose sight of what's important to you. Why are you talking to this person? Why
Yeah.
would you consider spending your valuable time, which is the greatest resource? We all only have a
Mhm.
finite amount of time. What's How is this benefiting you? How is this moving your case forward? How is this helping your healing? What's your goal here? And it can be really, really difficult. I think a lot of us tend to be almost too respectful
Mhm.
of institutions, and whether it's law enforcement, whether it's a media outlet, whether it's a television or documentary producer, whatever it is, you've still got to stop and think to yourself, how is this benefiting me, my family, this case?
Mhm.
And I know that's difficult for all of us, but that's something I find myself returning to day after day in each interaction. How is this beneficial?
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So, just a reminder for listeners, plug away, plug Mind Over Murder and whatever else you would like listeners to know.
Well, our podcast is called Mind Over Murder. It's a weekly podcast. I co-host with my podcast partner, Kristin Dilley. We drop a new episode every Monday morning, and we run. Now we have so many episodes in the can. We've been doing this for 5 years that we rerun content
Okay.
on Thursday. So new episode every Monday, and then if you want to, you can listen to what we call a bonus episode, which is something that we've run previously. Like this week, we had a fantastic conversation with a wonderful investigator and DNA expert named Lindsay Wade. She put out a
Mhm.
fantastic book last year called In My DNA, and she helped solve some incredible.
Oh, yeah.
She's
Uh-huh.
from the Pacific Northwest and just a wonderful person. We finally had a chance to meet her and her husband at
Oh,
CrimeCon last year, which was wonderful. But we had interviewed Lindsay, I think at least twice on Mind Over Murder. But for instance, that was a super interesting conversation where she taught us a lot about CODIS and DNA. And so there's an episode, the kind that we would repeat that we thought was particularly beneficial. And it's funny, listeners will tell us, oh, I listened to that Lindsay Wade episode. even though I listened to it last July. Um,
Yeah.
and I learned even more the second time around because, some of the stuff's
Wow.
complicated. And
Yeah.
you use the word educated. You want to
Mhm.
educate yourself. Lindsay Wade is one of those brilliant people that I could listen to talk all day. And
Oh,
so we run a new episode every Monday and a bonus episode every Thursday at Mind
love
Over
it.
Murder, available where podcasts are available.
I know, because there are plenty. So I'll make sure to link that in the episode bio as well, so everyone can check it out. But all right, this is one of my favorite parts of this podcast, and it is getting to know Bill. So these are rapid fire, whatever
Okay. I,
comes to you.
I'm not good at short answers, you can tell. All right, but I'll try.
Let's do it. All right, getting to know Bill. If you could have one superpower, what would it be and why?
I want the ability to bend spoons. No, I'm
Ooh.
sorry. I want the ability to bend people to my will, not spoons.
I kind of like the spoons though.
It is sort of a nice image, isn't it?
Really, it reminds me of Stranger Things.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I love that. Okay. What's the most interesting thing you've read, watched, or listened to lately?
Mm. All right. I just watched a television series that I had never seen before. Been talking to the producers about uh, appearing on the show.
Oh.
Called Wild Crime, and it's a series on Hulu. Um, that's about crimes in national parks, which is why
Oh,
they might want to interview me down the road. But I had never seen the show before.
yeah.
So I've had some terrific conversations with Lisa Wolfinger, who's she and her husband produced the show, and I really liked her. And I just been extremely busy with some stuff going on here at the house, and I Pamela and I finally had a chance to watch it, and we were both blown away. It was so good, and it was very interesting, very compelling, and tasteful, and I would say respectful of the victims.
Wow.
And so we saw two episodes last night, and we have already booked. We're going to watch two more from the first season tonight. And
Wow.
Pamela, my wonderful partner, is not as obligated to watch true crime as I am,
Yeah.
but she was really blown away by how good it was.
Oh,
And
that
so
makes
when
my heart.
she says, "Wow, I can't wait to watch
Yeah.
parts 3 and 4 tonight," that's a really good sign because
Yeah.
she's not uh, professionally obligated like I am.
Yeah. Well, that's great news to hear. I'm happy to hear it. So I'll also put that on this episode as well, where people can find that. Now, do you have a favorite show or movie?
Well, believe it or not, one of my favorites is LA Confidential,
Oh,
the movie,
okay.
um, with Jamie Cromwell and an
Yeah.
all-star cast, Kim Basinger and others.
Oh, yeah.
I love that one. A thin, handsome Russell Crowe is in there too.
Oh my gosh.
It's a great, it's a great story.
Yeah.
And I actually really love David Fincher's Zodiac,
Oh.
which is, an amazing unsolved case to this day.
Hmm.
I'm not sure that
Hmm.
case will ever be solved, but we'll see.
Hmm.
That's another favorite. I like The Usual Suspects. You're probably going to
Okay.
see a little bit of a through line here. I kind of
Yeah.
like I love film and television, and of course, I worked in the music business for many years. But I think film noir is some of my favorite in terms of movies.
Yeah. Oh, I like it. Okay, well, speaking of music, what kind of music are you into?
Well, I worked in the music business for a lot of years, so that's a hard one to pick.
I bet.
I, I love rock and pop and jazz, R&B,
Mm,
um, singer-songwriter
yeah.
stuff is always some of my favorites. I love a well thought out, well crafted song. Of course, I worked for ASCAP, the songwriters organization, for 14 years, and I
Right.
got a chance to meet a lot of amazing songwriters, composers, and music publishers. And so
Ooh,
that is something that is really near and dear to my heart.
love it. Oh, that's amazing. Now, if you were an animal, what would you be and
Oh,
why?
this is one of my life goals. I'm coming back as a sea otter next time
Oh,
around. Love the otters.
otter rocks.
I'm fascinated by animals. I
Yeah.
love animals. We have a long-haired dachshund. I guess he's an animal. Uh, Oliver Oliver Wendell Weiner is the
Oh.
only dachshund you know who's named for a Supreme Court justice. But my goal is to come back as a sea otter.
Oh, I love
I want
it.
to live up there near Monterey. I want to hang out in a bed of kelp. I want to break open abalone on my fat stomach. I want to meet beautiful lady otters or whatever they're called.
This might be one of my favorite answers so far.
I am
I love
this.
this.
I'm not making this up. I'm coming back as a sea otter.
I'm here for it.
You'll see me off the coast of Monterey.
Monterey.
Yeah.
I love it. So pure. Now, what's a hobby or passion that might surprise people about you?
Well, I'm a big cyclist. I love
Oh,
bicycles.
okay.
Um, Sports cars.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we've had the coldest, iciest winter up here in the northwest corner of Connecticut. So
Yeah.
in our carriage house garage, um, under a beautiful car cover sits our black Mazda Miata, just waiting
Wow.
for the snow to melt so we can start bombing around these country roads up here in Massachusetts, Connecticut,
Ugh,
etc.
that sounds lovely.
And
Oh,
the Lime Rock racetrack, which is Paul Newman's and Tom Cruise's, home track from
got it.
days gone by. That's
Yeah.
about 20 minutes away. So I like to go watch
Oh,
the sports cars go round and round.
that's amazing.
I'd go more
Wow.
often, but they won't let Oliver the dachshund into the.
Oliver, gotta sneak him in.
Well enough you could, but he's loud.
Yeah, I
He
remember hearing that.
he would bark at all the cars. We'd get kicked out for sure.
Love it. Now, do you have a go-to karaoke song if you karaoke?
Well, I don't have a great voice, so for the
That's okay.
longest time it was Dean Martin's "Everybody Loves Somebody Sometime" because it's
Oh.
not that hard a song to sing.
Fair.
Because I worked with all these great singer songwriters, so I
Right.
feel really humbled, when I'm
Hmm.
around these people that have incredible musical talent, which I don't have. So I would always go with something that wouldn't be too offensive. You're not going to hear me do anything musically challenging.
Yeah. That's great. Now, what about, is there a travel spot that you and Pamela just love or like just feels like second home or yeah.
Well, she grew up on Cape Cod, so that's a favorite. But I would say that now this might tie into the otter answer.
Oh.
We love the Central California coast from
Mm,
Santa Barbara up to San Luis Obispo and up
yeah.
to Monterey and all that stuff.
Okay. I,
That's one of our favorites.
oh, I need to do that as a Californian. I've never done it and I need to do
Oh,
it.
you never have? Oh my gosh.
I went to San Luis Obispo for the first time a year and a half ago, and it was just like driving through. But
Oh,
I need to. Like, truly, that is one of like the top things I need
SLO,
to do.
as they say, is just a gorgeous place. We actually thought
Yeah.
about maybe moving there. We actually came really close
Wow.
to buying a little cottage in outside Santa Barbara
Ooh.
years ago.
Yeah.
Didn't end up going down that road, but we
Yeah.
love that whole part of the central California coast. Not taking anything away from Los Angeles, where I used to live, or San
Yeah.
Francisco, which is a great place, but I like that
Whole
place in
chunk.
the middle there. It's
Ooh.
we have talked frequently about wanting to get back there.
That's amazing. Now, I love highlighting local small businesses. There anyone you want to shout out or give attention to?
Well, if you're in Norfolk, Connecticut, which is our little town, there's a fantastic new cafe called the Icebox Cafe,
Mm.
which people refer to this little town, Norfolk, as the icebox of Connecticut because we have the coldest temperatures in the state.
Oh boy.
Because we're almost into Massachusetts, we're right on the state line. But the Icebox Cafe is a new breakfast lunch place that's amazing. And I can see it from the back windows of our kitchen. So if the flag is fluttering, I know they're in there, serving up their amazing breakfasts. And I think to myself, as soon as this snow melts, I got to get back down there.
Down to the Icebox Cafe. Ooh, great. All right, last question for you. Who is a hero of yours and why?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one. I have a lot. Can I say my sister Cathy?
You can say Cathy.
I would say Cathy. Yeah, because people ask me all the time, why all this dedication to the Colonial Parkway murders? And my usual answer is, well, if you met my sister Cathy, you'd get it.
Yeah, I love that answer. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Bill, who knew I was going to cry on that last one?
I'm sorry. You make you tear
it warms my heart. I mean, it really does. And, I can see it, like I said, it was just such an honor to be on that panel with you and not knowing the entirety of your story and learning about it over these last few weeks has been really inspiring and thought-provoking. And I cannot thank you enough for everything that you are doing, not just on behalf of Cathy and Becky, but along with all those families and what you're trying to do just in terms of this industry as well. And Mind Over Murder is I just loved learning the story about, the names and how that came to be and the tongue in cheek of it. It really just goes to show what you can do with your voice and the impact that you can have. And I firmly believe you are one of those pioneers in this space, and we need more people like you. That's why I'm saying, when it comes to thinking about these trauma survivors that are doing just everything in their power on behalf of their sisters, Sarah and Julie as
Yeah.
well. It warms my heart as a survivor, let alone as a producer, because everything that you have shared today is so profound. And I really hope it gets to the ears to people who need to hear it. Because, like I said, we are in a time where true crime content will not be going anywhere. If anything, it just keeps coming up and it keeps being, fast and loose in this business. And so we've got to make sure that we're shouting these things out. And so big ups to you and everything that you are doing. So thank you again so much for coming on here and
Well,
sharing
thank
your
you
wisdom.
for everything you're doing. So I could reflect the last 2 minutes right back at you.
Well, thank you, Bill.
If you or someone you know has information related to the Colonial Parkway murders, you can contact the FBI's Richmond Field office. Their phone number is 804-261-1044. Additionally, tips can also be submitted online through the FBI's tip submission page. It's important to note that the Colonial Parkway murders remains an active case, and any information, no matter how small, could potentially help investigators. Be sure to join me next week when I sit down with Laura Donovan, a memoirist and essayist based in Portland, Oregon. Laura likes to think of herself as Harriet the Spy all grown up, if Harriet got a little softer and sillier with age. Like Harriet, Laura is on the spectrum. Before welcoming her first son in 2018, Laura spent a year and a half working on the series Crime Watch Daily with Chris Hansen, where she helped promote the show's content on social media to engage a broader audience. This is a conversation you might not expect, so be sure to tune in. This is True Crime in Hollywood, A Personal Tale, a La Activista production with music by Mickey O'Brien. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a review for the show. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, remember the victims and embrace the survivors.